The MAZ-7907 wasn't built to haul cargo, it was built to carry Armageddon, and it was just one of 10 machines the Soviet Union built that defied all logic. While the West refined and optimized, Soviet engineers asked one question: how impossible can we make this? The result? Pure Soviet madness. 28 meters long, 66 tons empty, 216 tons loaded, 12 driven axles, a gas turbine engine borrowed from a tank feeding electricity to 24 individual wheel motors. The MAZ-7907 wasn't designed to transport cargo, it was built to carry Armageddon. Developed in 1983 at the height of Cold War madness, this chassis was purpose-built for the RT-23 Selena II intercontinental ballistic missile system. The Soviets needed a mobile launch platform that could disappear into the countryside, making it impossible for American spy satellites to track their nuclear arsenal. The solution was this mechanical leviathan engineered around a backbone frame with a central transmission tube running its entire length. 4 front axles and 4 rear axles could turn independently, giving the 28-meter beast a turning radius of just 27 meters, tighter than many city buses. Top speed? A blistering 25 kilometers per hour. But speed wasn't the point. This machine could carry 150 tons across terrain that would swallow conventional trucks whole, powered by a 1,250 horsepower turbine that screamed like a jet engine. 2 prototypes were built and tested successfully. Then the Soviet Union collapsed, the arms race cooled, and the MAZ-7907 became obsolete overnight. Both examples still exist, rusting in storage at the MAZ proving grounds, too expensive to scrap, too classified to display, too magnificent to forget. Picture a mining dump truck so large that its cab sits 4.4 meters off the ground, higher than most single-story buildings. A truck that doesn't steer with wheels, but by hydraulically bending its entire frame in the middle. The Bell AZ-75501, built in 1991, was the Soviet Union's final gesture of industrial excess. A 280-ton capacity monster designed to make Western mining equipment look like children's toys. The truck's articulated frame allowed the front section, containing the engine, cab, and front axle, to pivot up to 30 degrees relative to the rear cargo bed. 2 massive hydraulic cylinders, 180 millimeters in diameter, provided the muscle. Every wheel was doubled and powered by its own electric motor, fed by a 12-cylinder locomotive diesel engine displacing 165 liters and producing 3,150 horsepower. Inside the cab, perched in the sky, operators enjoyed air conditioning, a radio, a clothing locker, and even a cassette player. Luxury touches that seem absurd on a machine designed to devour coal seams. 2 rear-view cameras fed displays in the cabin, making this behemoth one of the first mining trucks with electronic vision systems. The Belaz 75501 was shipped in pieces to the Neryungri coal mine in 1991 for testing. It worked. It worked beautifully. But by then, the Soviet economy was in free fall. Serial production never materialized. The single prototype continued working for nearly a decade before being dismantled around 2000, likely cut apart and sold as scrap. Somewhere in Siberia, pieces of the world's largest Soviet dump truck are probably now rebar in an apartment building. In 1967, Soviet engineers faced an unusual problem. How do you transport massive rocket stages from the factory to the Baikonur Cosmodrome when the roads between them don't exist? The answer was the ZIL-135 Shesh, a modular transporter that looked like someone welded a spacecraft carrier to an aircraft landing gear. Only one prototype section was ever built, assembled on July 28, 1967. It featured a massive welded frame supporting a modified fiberglass cab from the ZL-135. a cargo platform with wooden sides, and the most unusual feature, wheel assemblies borrowed from IL-18 aircraft. The machine could literally spin in place with a turning radius of just 5.1 meters measured to the outer wheel. Power came from two ZIL 375 engines producing 180 horsepower each. The primary engine drove a 120-kilowatt generator that fed electric motors in each of the four front wheels. The secondary engine connected to a mechanical transmission and powered only the rear axle, serving as backup for highway driving. Tests in June 1967 were promising. The ZL-135SH demonstrated excellent off-road capability and maneuverability across steppe terrain. But practicality intervened. The Soviets realized that building dedicated roads was cheaper and more reliable than developing a fleet of supercrawlers. The project died quietly, and the prototype likely vanished into storage. You'd think Soviet engineers would stop there. They didn't. Here's a vehicle designed for one specific job, dragging enormous gas pipes across Central Asian deserts where conventional trucks simply sink and die. The MAZ-127, an experimental 8x8 articulated truck, featured no front wheels that turned. Instead, the entire vehicle steered by breaking itself in half, a hydraulic joint allowing the front and rear sections to pivot independently. Built using components from the Ural 375D military truck, including its 240-horsepower MAZ 238 diesel, the MAZ-127 rode on either arched tires or pneumatic roller wheels, depending on terrain. Two balanced bogies distributed weight across the desert sand. In field testing across Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan during pipeline construction, the truck faced 100-meter sand dunes with slopes reaching 14 degrees. It struggled, spinning wheels in dry sand and occasionally getting stuck, but it also succeeded more often than it failed. The Ministry of Gas Industry was impressed enough to request production, but somewhere in the bureaucratic machinery, the project stalled. The MAZ-127 remained an experiment, another brilliant solution searching for a problem that conventional engineering eventually solved more cheaply. If the MAZ-7907 was excessive, the MAZ-7904 was apocalyptic. 32 meters long, 360 tons fully loaded, 12 driving wheels, a 1,500 horsepower main engine plus a 330 horsepower auxiliary diesel just to power the vehicle's support systems. This 12-axle monster was designed in 1983 for the same Selena missile system as its smaller sibling, but taken to even more extreme proportions. The cab was constructed from fiberglass to save weight, a laughable gesture on a vehicle that massed more than a loaded 747 jetliner. The tires were so specialized they had to be imported from Japan. Each wheel endured 30 tons of load and was driven by synchronized hydromechanical transmissions. Maximum speed, 27 kilometers per hour, though achieving that required perfect conditions. Testing at Baikonur revealed fatal flaws. The MAZ-7904 had poor off-road performance despite its size, weak handling characteristics, and a tendency to simply punch through the ground under its own monstrous axle loads. The machine wasn't conquering terrain, it was destroying it. After testing concluded, the prototype was stored in a Baikonur hangar for decades, too expensive to operate, too compromised to deploy. In 2010, it was finally scrapped, the largest truck chassis ever built in the Soviet Union, dismantled and forgotten. The next one takes a totally different direction. Named after the Cossack who conquered Siberia, the Ermak was designed to do the same, this time with cargo instead of swords. This 1963 three-axle behemoth measured nearly 11 meters long and could haul 25 tons across terrain that would stop ordinary trucks dead. Lead designer Rodionov and chief engineer Korotkonojka created something genuinely innovative, a heavy hauler that combined military ruggedness with civilian practicality. The Ermac featured large single tires, a short forward-mounted cab, and a MAZ 238 8-cylinder diesel producing 300 horsepower. Its hydro-mechanical transmission, two-speed transfer case with lockable differential, and automatic tire pressure system made it genuinely capable. During trials, it pushed through snow 1.5 meters deep. But the Ermac suffered from an identity crisis. Designers simultaneously optimized it for Arctic cold and desert heat, military logistics, and civilian forestry. The result pleased nobody. At 21 tons empty and nearly 3 meters tall, it was too big for the Army and too specialized for unclear civilian roles. After surveys revealed demand in the logging industry, a refined version entered production at the Mogilev automobile plant as the MAZ-7411 in 1970. The original Ermac had finally found its purpose, though by then it was barely recognizable. Soviet engineers had a talent for unexpected solutions. The Zyel E-167, designed in 1963, needed to transport 3.5-ton loads and work crews into the most remote corners of Siberia. The solution? Build it like a boat. The fiberglass cabin wasn't just lightweight, it was watertight, allowing the Zyel E-167 to ford rivers and lakes. Inside, 4 crew members enjoyed surprisingly thoughtful comforts. Adjustable driver's seat, dual heaters running off engine coolant, and, my favorite detail, an aluminum wood-burning stove in the rear compartment for extreme cold. 2 Zyel 375 gasoline engines, each producing 180 horsepower, were mounted backwards in the rear. Each engine powered one side of the vehicle through hydrodynamic transmissions. True dual-engine redundancy. If one failed, you could limp home on the other. The suspension borrowed from proven designs, rigid-mounted center axle, independent suspension on front, and rear axles using transverse arms. The steering system controlled both front and rear wheels using 2 hydraulic boosters. Testing began in January 1963 on frozen Moscow region terrain. For 2 years, the prototype performed admirably. In 1965, it was deployed to a Siberian gas pipeline construction project, where it worked in conditions that would kill conventional vehicles. Yet, despite practical success, government interest evaporated. Serial production never happened. The single prototype vanished into history, another brilliant machine lost to changing priorities and bureaucratic indifference. By 1987, Soviet missile transporters had evolved into refined weapons platforms. The MAZ-79-22 represented this evolution's peak, an 8-axle chassis purpose-built for the Topol-M ICBM system. Unlike earlier designs, the 79-22 featured steerable wheels on 3 front and 3 rear axles, dramatically improving the 20-meter transporter's maneuverability. The chassis rode on independent hydrop pneumatic suspension for each wheel, with wide profile tires and adjustable internal pressure. Power came from a new MAZ diesel engine displacing 25.9 liters and producing 780 horsepower, mated to a 4-speed hydromechanical transmission with 2 reverse gears. Curb weight, 39 tons. Range, 400 kilometers, enough to relocate before satellite surveillance could pinpoint the missile's new position. The MAZ-79-22 completed factory testing but never entered service. By the time refinements produced the updated MAZ-79-22-1 in 1995, the Cold War had ended and Russia's defense budget had collapsed. The chassis existed, proven, and ready, but the missiles it was meant to carry were being decommissioned faster than new ones could be built. But the weirdest Soviet vehicle wasn't built for war at all. It was designed to push airplanes, and it looked like nothing else on Earth. No other country built anything like the MAZ-541, an airport tug that looked like someone stretched a luxury sedan to grotesque proportions. Designed in 1956, only 3 were ever built. The MAZ-541's unusual profile served a specific purpose, staying low enough to approach an aircraft's front landing gear without striking the fuselage. It measured 7.8 meters long, 3.4 meters wide, but only 2.8 meters tall. Front wheels came from the MAZ-2 14 truck. Rear dual wheels were borrowed from the MAZ-525 quarry dump truck. Different diameters, front and rear, chosen to maximize traction on concrete runways. To ensure sufficient grip, the tractor's weight was pushed to 28 tons, ballasted with steel. A diesel D12 engine producing 525 horsepower could theoretically move anything on the airport. Fuel consumption was catastrophic, 45 liters per hour of operation, equivalent to 130 liters per 100 kilometers if you somehow drove it on roads. The Ministry of Aviation Industry ordered 13 units. 3 entered service and worked until 1970. But as jet aircraft grew larger and heavier, the MAZ-541 became inadequate. The remaining 10 units were never built, and the 3 that existed were eventually retired. Somewhere in Russia, these strange machines might still exist in storage, too weird to scrap, too useless to revive. Deep in the archives of Soviet engineering lies a machine built for terrain so hostile that conventional vehicles couldn't even attempt the journey. The ZIL-157K desert transporter, developed in the early 1960s, was a purpose-built adaptation of the ZIL-157 military truck, reimagined for the endless dunes of Central Asia. It rode on ultra-wide balloon tires, each over a meter in diameter, specifically designed to float over loose sand instead of sinking into it. The truck's standout feature was its centralized tire inflation system, a pioneering innovation that allowed the driver to adjust pressure on the move. On firm ground, pressure stayed high for speed. In deep sand, it dropped as low as 0.5 atmospheres, dramatically increasing traction by spreading weight across a larger surface area. Under the hood, the ZIL-157K retained its 5.6-liter inline-six gasoline engine, producing 104 horsepower. It wasn't fast, 65 kilometers per hour on roads, much less off-road, but it didn't need to be. With a manual 5-speed transmission, 6-wheel drive, and 5.6 tons of unladen mass, it was a crawling, climbing, sand-chewing machine. Field trials in the Karakum and Kizilkum deserts proved its worth. Where standard trucks sank or overheated, the ZIL-157K kept moving, slowly but reliably. Still, it wasn't perfect. The oversized tires wore out quickly on hard surfaces, and the truck was heavy for its powertrain. Eventually, newer vehicles matched its performance with less complexity. The ZIL-157K quietly faded into obscurity, its small batch of prototypes likely left to rot in forgotten outposts. But for a brief time, it was the Soviet Union's best answer to the desert's most unforgiving challenges. Every machine in this list shares the same fate: technical success, operational failure. They worked. The engineering was sound, often brilliant. But Soviet planners kept changing requirements, budgets evaporated, political priorities shifted, and the Union itself collapsed. These machines were casualties not of bad design, but of a system that demanded the impossible and then forgot why it asked. What remains are photographs, specifications, and the persistent question: what if they'd succeeded? What if the MAZ-7904 had actually deployed missiles? If the Bell AZ-75,501 had spawned a fleet? If the ZIL-135 Sheikh had carried cosmonauts' dreams across the steppe? We'll never know. But the machines themselves, rusting in storage, cut apart for scrap or simply vanished, stand as monuments to an era when engineers dreamed without limits and reality was merely an obstacle to overcome. The Soviet Union built these giants to prove it could. That, ultimately, was both their greatest strength and their fatal weakness.